So,
Right, well, here we are.
AI.
AI. It's the future. How are we going to introduce this?
We could do it a bit tongue-in-cheek. We could just say sort of, we just wanted to get on with the engineering and Woody forced us to have a conversation about it.
We could. That's going. It buzzed once.
Yours is yellow.
Oh. So where do we begin?
Well, I do think having some sort of working definition of AI is useful because I think it means lots of different things to lots of different people. And I don't know if you have a definition that you sort of use because it's sort of this amorphous thing now.
I tend to think of it in there's two varieties of it. There's the LLMs and then there's the stuff the AI, the agents that do the more media rendering stuff. So the things that actually render audio or video. Mm-hmm. And then the LLMs are all about language and we use those for coding, and that's kind of what we're talking about here with Tracktion. There is a whole world of the media-based AI, which we're not really going to touch on, but it's important to mention.
That's generally what I was going to say as well, in that AI, I think, is a term given to software systems that exhibit behavior that only would have been possible from humans in the past. And they're usually based around techniques at some kind of low level, around neural networks, and then you can build models on top of them. And at some point they split, as you said. You go into the large language models, which are based around effectively just predicting the next word. And that's all they do. And everything else is a whole bunch of tricks and hacks and things. And we'll dig into kind of how we take advantage of that. And then the other side, you have your more perhaps musical generative, like images, audio, that work slightly differently. Stable diffusion and diffusion models gets talked about a lot, but that's more your kind of generative systems for audio, and we're not talking about that today.
No. I guess AI, the other interesting thing about AI when you're trying to introduce it and talk about what it is, it's the first tech really that's ever come along where you don't really need an instruction manual. Yeah. Because it's like someone will say, how do I use an LLM? Well, you just talk to it. You ask it how you use it, because you already know how to use it, because that's what makes them intelligent.
Yeah, and that is a bit of a paradigm shift that we've seen in testing. We've seen people just try and guess what it's capable of, and then perhaps it doesn't match up with what they think, and that's slightly jolting. And I always say, well, just ask it, right? It knows what it can do. That's how it's trained.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we rewind a couple of decades, because we're talking about the present and the near future, mm-hmm. How has music production changed in, say, the last sort of 20, 25 years when sort of it was becoming more computer-based?
Yeah, because obviously now everything falls into two eras. There's the pre-2023, the BAI and AAI eras, as it'll probably all be measured from at some point in the future. Yeah. Back in the pre-AI world, it was, I guess things started as soon as computers could do audio and were powerful enough to do that in about 2000-ish to actually be useful. We got some great tools appeared, some DAWs and plugins began, and all the world as we know it kicked off. And it's gradually got more and more and more complicated. Yeah. The tools have got bigger, the plugins have just expanded into a bazillion of them that more than anyone could ever even, look through a list of. The DAWs have got ridiculously complicated features everywhere. And it feels like this is an inflection point for that, because they've got so complicated that humans are struggling to use them. Yeah. And maybe this is how we solve it.
Yeah, I think that's my thoughts exactly. And that when I first picked up some digital recording software when I was a teenager, you could sort of understand what it could do in a few hours, whereas now I don't even understand all of what our software does.
And we wrote it, And occasionally we go like, how do I do this thing that I wrote? I can't remember. It's in there somewhere. I kind of know it exists. But
And it's an interesting idea that you're building software where the majority of your audience are not necessarily technical people. So you're creating this incredibly complicated software application for people who don't necessarily have an interest in learning a really complicated bit
And the
of
ones
software.
who are technical don't really want to be technical at that point. They want to be doing some music,
Yeah.
because that's what the point of it is. So they don't really want to be learning about how our internal data models work, so they can figure out how to. They just want to get on with the musical side.
Most people, and I guess that's interesting that is why you wrote Tracktion as it was back in the day, right?
I was trying to make a simple door, and like all the doors, it's got more and more complicated over the years because it needs to do all the things that people want to do.
Yeah.
And you got to put them somewhere, and they will, you try and keep it simple, but it's difficult because there's just too much stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, doors are some of the most complicated software that there is, I think, at this point.
So as software makers, we have to try and kind of deal with all of that in a seamless way in order to give people something that tries to get out of their way when they want to be creative. You might be a musician or a composer that's doing a piece of music on contract, and being able to get it done quickly is beneficial, i.e. not spending a lot of time messing around with the software. Or you might be a hobbyist, and what you want to do is be creative and not spend ages learning where they've put some control in a new menu somewhere.
And then they move it, of course.
Yeah.
And I do think the other thing about the way things have progressed over the last 25, 30 years is I don't think there's going to be any new audio software in the sense of there's no new capabilities. No, I don't think anyone's going to invent a new type of synth that suddenly... Because we can make all the sounds, we can do pretty much all the effects. There's refinements on these, but now we've reached a point where we can do anything. As a user, you can do anything, but now the problem is finding the thing you want to do, navigating all the things you can do, and that's become the hard bit rather than doing the thing in the first place, which used to be the technical challenge, but now isn't. I
guess we are limited ultimately by our ears, right? So unless you can find some new frequencies. Yeah. Do we want to go into, is AI damaging the music tech industry?
Maybe.
Well, so, I mean, let's expand upon that generative AI side of things in terms of generating audio. It's a complex area. There's lots of moral and ethical and legal issues surrounding it. But I think the thing, at least for me, that kind of remains to be seen, because there's a lot of hype and it's new at the moment, but it's whether people enjoy making music by prompting. So do they like to describe what they want to hear and then listening to it back? And I guess there's two halves of that. There's the whole song generation, which might be useful for lots of use cases. And then there's the individual components, so describing an audio loop or an instrument. And yeah, how fun is that really? Because that's a large amount of the people that use software.
It does feel the kind of tools where you sort of have a user go, la-dee-da-da-da, and then it creates an orchestral backing track for that random thing that you just hummed, and then makes your voice sound like an opera singer doing it. Feels kind of empty to me somehow. Whereas using AI to fix some problem in the music you recorded is fantastic. Helping you, create some ideas. Yeah, it's great. But I think it's that very generative stuff that is also causing division at the moment between people. That's the controversial stuff.
It's controversial, one, because of the potential training material. I don't think that's fully disclosed everywhere, and I think that is getting cleaned up a bit. But artists are rightly aggrieved if their material is being used to effectively generate new material. But also for working musicians, if your job is to create music for adverts or TV, or perhaps you just put it on an auction site, and all of your work is suddenly being done by an ad agency or something like that, then that's your income gone. And if people don't have income to buy the tools that they use to make music, like our software, then the software suffers as well, because we can't invest in it in the same way. So it has this kind of knock-on effect, and it's wider than that as well. You know, if AI reduces income for people, then they can't spend it on their hobbies, which we're largely a part of as well, because music making should be fun, right?
It should, and like using AI to solve protein folding questions, and in order to find a cure for cancer is one use of AI, and using AI to replace musicians is kind of a very, like, we don't need to replace musicians. It's not, it's possible, so it will probably happen, but it's not useful to the human race, because people are musicians because they like being musicians. It's not a problem that needs solving like some other things are. It's inevitably going to happen.
I'm still on the fence about this. I think it certainly will in some areas, but I do think people, even if they don't make music themselves, they enjoy relating to somebody through music.
Yeah.
And this has come up a lot in discussion with friends, and so, you know, why can't people have that similar relationship in generated music? Perhaps it's a persona that creates a band and people get on board with that. And we've had that before, you know, lots of groups create their own personas and that's what you sort of engage with. Yeah. So maybe, but I do think the human element and the connection is still something that's there and people are asking for. Yeah. Maybe that brings us on to why, if we've talked about like the bad sides of it, why is Waveform and Tracktion in adopting AI in Waveform 14?
Why are we doing that? Are we the bad guys?
Potentially, but I think we're taking a slightly different approach to what people might think of when we say we're adding AI to Waveform. We're not really adding AI to Waveform. We're adding a sort of portal to AI within Waveform, and perhaps that's a sort of a bad way of explaining to it. But we've talked about the software is so complicated these days, and lots of people just want to get on with making their music. And LLMs are really good at taking a lot of information and then making it human queryable. So in the most basic way, you can take everything that Waveform does and a user can question it to find out how to do stuff. So that might speed up their workflow because they don't have to go and read the manual and things like that. Mm-hmm. And remember I said earlier that AI is essentially just sort of tricks on tricks on tricks. Rather than just giving it some information, we can give it entry points. So we can say, why don't you get some information about my session? And then you have some context with which to reply. So if you ask about how do I add a plugin to my guitar track, it knows what track your guitar track is, so it can talk about it. And I think what we're doing is really building up those entry points. So any conversation you have with the LLM is grounded in that context. And the reason we're doing that is because it's very hard to do that outside of the DAW. Now, lots of people might make music or use Claude or ChatGPT or something whilst they're working on something. They might ask it some questions, they might ask it production techniques, but you either have to describe what your session is like, or you have to constantly copy and paste bits in and out of it. And that's just quite jarring, it's not very natural. Whereas if it just knows what your session is, it knows what the key is, what the tempo, you might want to give it the genre that you're working on. It can look at your song structure, so can talk about things that you might want to add next or where you might want to fill out some bits of your session. It can sort of help you when you need it. And I think that's the key point, is it's not a pervasive thing that just diffuses every button you click. It's just an area when you want some assistance, you can go to and ask it.
And it's that thing where you're working on something and you have a question. You have a question. You can phrase it in English in your mind, which is like, how the hell do I get a plugin on this, or how do I route this to here, or what do I do about this track? And you can actually just say that, and you'll probably get pretty far down down the road of getting a decent answer for it. And that's the useful bit. It's skipping the bit between having the thought and not having to do the legwork of figuring out how to do that, implement that thought yourself.
And we sort of, one of the reasons we're able to do this is because we rewrote all of our shortcuts about 3 or 4 years ago, actually it's probably more like 5 years now, into a JavaScript API, which we called JavaScript macros at the time. And then people could use that API to write their own bits of sort of compound functionality. So you could use them to create a track, set the name, add some clips, add a plugin from your library and so on. But it does mean that you sort of have to know JavaScript and able to write that. But it turns out that LLMs know JavaScript really well. And if we give them the API, you can just tell it the functionality you want and it will figure out how to get that functionality.
And it'll write it better than me.
Yes. And this means you can create really complex workflows really quickly and just execute them. And something that might take someone 20 minutes to set up with a bit of searching, and even if they know it really well, it's a lot of manual clicking, you can just ask it to generate you that and it will. So we're sort of trying to take away those long periods that take you out of that creative mindset and then just make them almost instant.
Yeah.
If you are looking for, say, some samples or something like that, the typical way of searching is like a plain text search, right? So you'll say, "Oh, give me some smooth bass," and it will look through your library and it might look at the titles and then it might look at some tags. And if you don't have smooth or bass in there, then it might go, "Well, I don't know." Whereas with an LLM search-based engine, it knows that smooth has lots of synonyms. So it can kind of build up this hit list of potential matches and then look through your library and see how many rank closely, order them for you and show you them. So we're sort of also trying to disclose information in a way that feels more natural, because if you were asking someone to play something on an instrument, you would describe them, "I'll play it like this," and they would know what you meant. You don't have to say, drag out a piece of paper and say, "Play it like this," which is kind of the old way of doing things. There's lots of use cases, and I think we come up with them all the time. I came up with an idea on the way over here, and through every conversation someone hits a roadblock and they say, "Oh, well, can it do this?" I go, "Well, actually all we need to do is add this bit of functionality, add a hook for it, and then it can do it." Like building arrangements was one that got spoken about. Someone said, "Well, I want to describe the song I want to build, and then it should build me an arranger clip and perhaps set up some instruments for me ready to go so I can just jump into it." I said, "Oh, well, I just need to add the ability for it to read the arranger track, and then you can have a little conversation, say, I want verse, chorus, whatever. You can prime it to say, this is an EDM track or it's a rock track, and then it will just do all of that for you, and you didn't even have to know that feature existed for it to happen."
Yeah.
Why are we adopting AI now? It's been around for a number of years. Particularly, I would say, coming up to about a year now is when things started to get serious. And the ecosystem is just really good now. So the frontier models, all of the big companies that are building LLMs for everyday use, provide APIs, essentially use points that we can access, and then we can shape our queries or messages. They can get run on their huge server farms and then give us the replies back. So I think the reason we're doing this now is because we've reached a stage of maturity of, one, the ecosystem and the usability is very good, but also the capabilities are very good.
Because when you did most of the work on our AI functionality, and I said to you at the start, like, should we just have some cheap models? Should we just because it's not super difficult work that we're asking the LLMs to do here. They just got to look at the manual, interact with our API. Should we just use a cheap one? And you were like, no, because it's it's actually quite difficult what these things have to do now. And certainly the more advanced stuff where you're asking it to give you, suggestions about how to improve your whole mix, or insert instrument sections and things, is actually pretty difficult. And the models have only really just got good enough to do that hard work now, which it's interesting.
I think the big shift we've seen, particularly in sort of the last 4 to 5 months, is if you really knew what you were doing with an LLM, you could, and what the capabilities of the system were, is you could kind of guide it a lot. Whereas now they're much better at realizing what the task is. And particularly with the more complex tasks and longer conversations, they can sort of retain what's happening a lot more. Whereas before they'd sort of forget what was mentioned at the start, or they might not know that a function to do something exists. Whereas now they're much better at figuring out what you're asking of them.
Yeah, and I think the reason that the fact that you want a really good model is kind of why we also did our BYO key model for how we are interacting with these things.
Yeah.
BYO key being bring your own key. So how does that work?
So the reason we did that is a number. Firstly, it's the simplest way for you to access with a number of providers. So the way it works is you choose your provider. We currently support Anthropic and OpenAI. And then you create an account on their website and then generate a platform key or an API key. And then you put that into our software, and that effectively lets our assistant dispatch messages through your account and then come back. There are a number of ways you can do this. You could have something like working on the Tracktion servers, and then you use your Tracktion account, and then we kind of funnel all of the requests through it. And I actually did that at the start, but the UX is not very good, because then you have to perhaps have money in your Tracktion account, and you have to kind of have all these messages going through. It means if we want to update the systems, you've got to update it in multiple places, and it just all gets a bit sort of gnarly. Whereas using the APIs in the way that they're supposed to be used, bringing API keys and you having control over what models you use, is like the most frictionless way of doing it, I think. And we can build upon that over time. We can add new LLMs, and there should be something for everyone, I think, there. Now, there was a question of why don't we allow local LLMs, and we have tested this, but they've only recently, I would say in the last couple of months, got to the point where they're relatively useful. And at that point, they're only really as useful, unless you've got a super powered like GPU powered machine, they're only really as useful as the lowest tier of your kind of frontier models. So yeah, they could synthesize information from the manual, but they're not going to be able to analyze some MIDI clips and tell you what's interesting, or pull the chords out of them or something like that. And the other problem is they use a lot of memory. So anything more than a couple of questions, and they just eat all your system RAM, and that's generally not good when you're trying to make music at the same time. So it's something we'll keep an eye on, something that we might expose in the future, but it's just not very good user experience at the moment. And that's what we wanted to do. You know, everyone knows AI is simple, it's time saving, and if we built it around a system that was incredibly complicated and no one could use, then we've fallen at the first hurdle, really.
So when we release Waveform 14 and it's out there and people get this and they want to try AI, what kind of things will they be able to do on day one?
Well, there's the really basic stuff, which is information retrieval and synthesis. So we've updated the manual to include all of the features that are in there.
No, AI updated the manual.
AI did update the manual, yeah. Do I want to explain how that works, or people go, oh, you just... yeah. So we have, as a team, updated the manual to have, I think, all of the features that the software does now. And this means that you can ask the assistant how to do something. It also has access to all of your keyboard shortcuts. So rather than having to go to the settings page, look through, perhaps guess the name of the operation that you want to do, you can say, how do I, what's the keyboard shortcut to do this? And it will tell you. Or you can say, I want to bind that to Command P. And it will say, sure, I can do that. And then just do it for you. So we're trying to avoid tab switching and moving around like that. So that's sort of like the lowest level side of things. Then we've talked about the API, which we've got the existing API, which is quite high level functionality. And we've added a whole bunch of new APIs for lower level functionality. So you can now read MIDI clips, write clips. You can read things like the chord track, the arranger track, which is your song structure, and write to them as well. And what this does is it gives the LLMs a whole bunch of context for either writing new scripts or using it to generate information. So it can, with our API, it can write these JavaScript macros with very specific tailored workflows. So you might say, I don't know, if you're a rock musician or a techno producer or something, you might tell it that I'm a techno producer, and then it just remembers that for all of your sessions. So you don't need to keep repeating that. And then when you say, I'm writing a song and I want it to have this sort of progression or this feel, it can say, all right, well, here's an arrangement and here's a starting set of chords for you. And then you can just get right into making the music. You can use our existing tools like the progression of the pattern generator to build out playing those chords or some melodies based on them. And we're not saying that it should generate your song for you, but it should be able to do the jobs that you find laborious in order to get you to where you want to be. So it can take the job of a studio assistant, or just someone next to you who might say, oh, what does this sound like? Just strum some chords on the guitar that you can then kind of bounce off and build upon. And then the tier above that is the more creative side of things. So because it's an LLM, you can ask it about production advice. You could say, this song feels a bit lacking in the chorus, and of course it will know what section the chorus is and what instrumentation you've got there. So it might say, oh, why don't you try, a drum roll on a certain bar or something. So it can perhaps get you out of a rut. And it can also read your MIDI sequences. So you could say something like, give me a variation of this. So it can generate a new variation to create some difference. You can extract the chords from a chord sequence or a melody, if that's useful. You can say, I've got a bass line, but I want a melody to accompany that, and maybe that serves as a starting point for you. So you can build on from that. And it sort of depends what you get out of it is the things that make your life difficult. And if you have use cases that you think, oh, it's just a pain to do this, either try the assistant or let us know and we can add stuff to it.
Yeah.
We find that we sort of have all these bits and pieces that it can do, and then there'll be a workflow sort of over here, and all we need to do is add one little thing and suddenly everything kind of cascades out of it. And that's going to be the interesting thing going forwards, I think, is how we can expose that functionality in a lot of ways.
So are there any big things that we're going to add in the future that we haven't had a chance to add for the release?
Yes, there's a couple of interesting things. You yourself have worked on a project for a number of years called Cmajor, which is, if you want to give everyone a quick recap of that, or perhaps they haven't heard of it.
Well, they don't need to know anymore, because Cmajor is a DSP language for writing audio code, but an LLM can do it now. And it turns out that LLMs are actually very good at writing Cmajor. So you can actually ask one to write me a Cmajor program which does some effect, and it'll probably do a pretty decent job of it, amazingly. And yeah, we can build that straight into Waveform, so you can just ask it to generate you whatever your synth or effect is, rather than trying to find a plugin that does it. Just create a plugin that does it, and it'll do a little interface. It'll even do you a UI for it, like a proper, custom user interface, however you want it, that will just appear in Waveform. No plugins. Well, it is a plugin, but it'll no external plugins needed, and tweak that to your heart's content. So that's an interesting one.
And because those are essentially just a bunch of text files, you can share them with people, and then you can build on them. They're not sort of a locked down, pre-compiled thing. If someone has a compressor that they've shared that sounds really good, a user asked me the other day, they said, oh, can you add some filtering to the sidechain input? And I suddenly thought, well, if it was just a Cmajor one, you could go add a filter to the sidechain and it would go,
and then there's your filter, exactly.
Instantly, without you having to go and spend money on a new one or trying to find
it's
one.
Very quicker than finding one.
Yeah.
I think we are going to hit a point where it is quicker than ploughing through the 1,000 possible compressors that you might choose from to just go, well, I know what I want, just do that, and it'll just do it.
So I think that's going to be really exciting. And then there's whole chunks that we haven't exposed to the API yet, just because we haven't got there yet. There's the ability to do rendering and exports. So we are working on a new rendering and export system, but being able to expose that to the LLM means that you should be able to ask what renders you want in just a text form, and it just spit them out. So if you're creating lots of stems or certain mix downs, you should just be able to tell it and it'll go, yeah, I can do that.
And it'll give them good names, put them in where you want it on your disk and do all that stuff,
Whereas that's usually lots of setting up and clicking and typing and things.
Typing all the names in.
So that should speed up the export process. And we are also working on a system to analyze the perhaps vocals or words if you're recording a podcast or something like that. So we can pull that in, and then you have a sort of very natural interface to work with in the assistant. So you can say later, remove all of Jules's bits, and no one will hear this. And then just give me the highlights.
But that is the level at which you'll be able to work, really.
So I think it's worth reiterating is what we want to do is hear from people and get feedback on what are the things that they find time consuming that they don't want to spend time on, and see how we can improve upon those. I wonder if I should go into a little bit more detail about how the system works, just because it's kind of complicated, but also not that scary once you kind of dig into it. So Waveform is a piece of software as it always was. And what we have added is essentially just a text chat view that will pass messages onto the frontier model of your choice, so Anthropic, OpenAI. And then, as I said earlier, everything is just hacks and tricks on top of LLMs. What we've done is have a whole bunch of these kind of local functions which can do things like read the JavaScript API or look up a section of the manual, all sorts of things. And then you have a prompt or a system prompt. And the system prompt is what gives the LLM its restrictions, its behavior, how you tailor it for it to feel like it's part of that application rather than the general chat interface when you go onto ChatGPT or something. So ours will say things like your assistant for the Waveform DAW application, you should have knowledge of audio, MIDI, production, those kind of things. And then we explain to it any relevant context. So what you might have selected at the time, or the tracks, the song structure, and then all of those tools as well that are provided. So essentially every time you write a message, it gets that prompt and a summary of all the tools that it can use, and then the model will figure out what it needs to do in order to reply to you. And some of those things might be say, oh, I want a chapter of the manual, go look that up and give it to me. And then that gets added as some context for it so it can use that in its reply. And it's the same if it's writing a JavaScript model. It says, okay, well, I I've got an overview of the API, so I know roughly what capabilities, but if I'm going to add a clip, then get me all of the functions and their specifications for adding clips, and then it sort of rolls that into its response and then gives that back to you. So that's the way that we deal with the LLM side of things. And then to make it usable, we have this kind of fairly modern web UI front end that looks at the messages for bits of information that it can expose in more interactive ways. So if it's a script, we have the options to run script, and we explicitly have a button because it might take, a few seconds to build that response, and you might have done something else. And if it says, replace the selected clip with something else or add an instrument on my selected track, you don't necessarily want it to just run while you're in the middle of something else. So there's a button to run the script, or you can save it to the library, or you can tell it to bind it to a keyboard shortcut. And then certain bits of information like note sequences, JSON, and we can say, actually, just drag that onto a track. So we can provide all those little kind of hooks in that way. And that's kind of all there is to it, really. It sounds simple, but there's a lot of kind of fine moving parts in order for it to feel kind of a natural interface.
Behind the scenes, yeah. But that is the thing if you've ever sat down with someone and tried to, and they say, oh, can you teach me to use AI? And you sit them down and you go, okay, well, here's the chatbot. And then they say, well, what do I do? And it's like, you say, well, what do you want to do? And they tell you, and you say, well, type that. Yeah. That's that. You've answered your own question of how to use this thing. Yeah. That's that. At least that's the idea, and we'll keep refining it as we get feedback.
Yeah.
I have a question, a future-ish question. I've just thought of this. Like when I do my coding these days, using an AI bot, I tend. In the past, I would have my code editor and I'd go and write code. But now I just tell the AI to write the code for me, and then I look at the result. Mm-hmm. Do you think we'll ever reach a point with Waveform or DAWs where we show the session on the screen, but you never interact with it visually? Maybe that all the interaction, all the control of the entire recording session is just via telling an AI what you want to do, and you can see what's going on, and you can play it, and you can see the tracks, but you never, you can't click on them to change them. It's just showing you what's there, and then to change it, you simply say how you want it to change, and then it changes. Do you think we'll ever reach a point where it's more hands-off like that? Because we are, in coding, we are all getting to that point. Is it going to be the same for music production?
Possibly, and for some people. But I think if we are making tools for people to enjoy, it depends what they enjoy the most. If they enjoy the process, like I still write some code, believe it or not, and I think there is a level of understanding that you get through working your way through writing code that you don't get through using an LLM agent. So, for a lot of people, part of the creative process might be moving those clips around or turning knobs on effects, rather than saying, no, make it more bassy, and then it just interpreting that. Yeah. But I think for a lot of people, it might get to that point where that's what they want to do. And I think depending on how far you move that needle, you sort of end up at the complete audio generation, right?
I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about the complete control rather than the generation.
If you look at image editing with AI now, you can give it an image and you can say, remove that person or change that person's hair, right? And it's effectively the same thing. If you've got a piece of audio and you say, remove the guitar track or, make it more distorted, whether it's just doing it on the audio through some kind of diffusion model, or whether it's moving the session. A
session, I guess it doesn't. At some point, the user doesn't care.
It's. It's sort of like the Turing test, isn't it? At some point, it doesn't matter. I think the difference would be that you could hand off that session to someone else, and then they could work on it.
But then you can hand off a finished audio track to someone else, and they can work. That's a good question.
True. I do think it has interesting ideas for accessibility, though. Because someone that is perhaps visually impaired might not be able to see all the tiny buttons and clicks and things, but they still want to make music, and being able to instruct it to do the things that they know they want to do could genuinely be useful for them. With lots of AI, I kind of feel like it's somewhere in the middle. And I think that mirrors software development, right? There's lots of people vibe coding stuff where they might not have any software engineering experience at all. They just have an idea and they tell the system to go off and build it, and then they review it, ask for changes. That's one thing. And what we've seen really is an explosion of the personal projects and apps and things for sale, but not much value there, right? It's not like software sales have increased at the same rate.
Yeah.
It might be fun for the people doing it, and that's perfectly fine, but it doesn't change the rest of the software world so far. And then you have sort of the people like us who are writing software on a day-to-day basis that still, in Waveform at least, understand everything it does. It can just do certain things a lot more quickly.
Yeah.
So we know the structure that we want. We might know the patterns, we might not. It might suggest some to us. And we kind of very hands-on guide it, and it just makes all the edits a lot quicker than we can kind of type it all out. So, you know, we'll probably get the same. It's not really a dichotomy, it's more like a smooth scale where people are using it to generate complete solutions or complete sessions, and people that are using it just to speed up the things that take a long time. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it will change drastically?
I think I'd have to try it to see. It would be nice if you could sit with your instrument and not have to go back to the keyboard and just say to it, hey, okay, I'll try that again. And, you know, I'll take that out. Or
I think we're already there on that front.
We are,
Yeah. But, I mean, there's a whole bunch of other things that could do the same job. I think it depends if people find typing or talking to their DAW a natural interface.
Yeah, I don't find talking to my computer very natural. I'm too old for that.
Well, it's an interesting question, isn't it? That most people I know type to their LLMs.
Yeah.
Whereas they all have voice input functionality. They'll all have a conversation with you. But for me at least, I need to think about what I'm going to say and what it's just said to me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't feel quite like a natural conversation at the moment. But maybe that's just me adapting to it.
Yeah. So we've done this initial AI feature in Waveform. It's gone really well. We've had some real fun with it. Oh, does this mean we're going to just keep pushing it that way forever and like pushing AI on people, or are we going to?
No, is the easy answer. I think there's a chunk of work that has to be done, which we've largely done now, which is to build the system in a way that it can talk to the models and also interact with the DAW. So that's kind of the hard, tricky bit. And moving forwards, it will be about building functionality and exposing it to the assistant. And that bit is actually quite straightforward. What we want to do now is continue building the features in the software that people want and they find useful, enable them to do their tasks. And all we'll probably do is add a little entry point so the assistant can also use them. Yeah. And I think what we're finding is if we want to build features, just building them in a way that they can be controlled with something like JavaScript is actually a very nice way to design the features that we would do even if we didn't have Assistant. But because we build them like that, they naturally bind to the Assistant really easily. So if anything, I think we get a cleaner software architecture. It's more understandable by an LLM, which means it's also more understandable by us and should be a better designed feature as a result, I think.
Yeah. But we're not going to push it down people's throats.
No, it's there. It lives in the browser at the moment, you know, the side panel. So it's just another tab that you can start up. It doesn't do anything if you don't provide it with an API key, because it can't. And you can remove it from the browser, from the settings page if you want to. And the only reason we've made it a toggle off is because the people that probably want it most might struggle to find out where you turn it on.
And it's hard to ask the AI assistant where the AI assistant is until you've got to the AI assistant. So that makes sense.
But if you've got to the point of making an API key and putting it in, you've probably found it out. But yeah. But who knows where we'll go from there. There's lots of things, like I said, that we can add to it, and also the capabilities of these things are becoming more and more. So maybe we'll do some sound analysis, and it can tell you interesting bits or how you might want to master your program or your software, music,
whatever you're making, whatever you call it.
So I think people will hopefully be interested in using it. Might not be for everyone, but that's fine. You can turn it off. And if you're interested in it, give us feedback. Let us know what features you want it to expose to it, what tasks you find irritating that you don't want to have to do anymore that it might be capable of doing, and also all the existing software functionality that doesn't have anything to do with AI. We want to know about that as well.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah.
Do we need? I think we should have done like a clap thing at the start, right, to align it.
If we do it now, that will still work.
It will still work.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ready?
Go on.
Well,